I have a volunteer for the pledge. Do I have a volunteer for the prayer? I'll do one or the other. Prayer.
Do you need another one? Deborah?
I might have another one. If you don't.
There you go.
All right, good evening. I will call the Provo City Planning Commission hearing for Wednesday, September 26th to order. It is 6:07 p.m. We have 5 items on the agenda this evening. The items that appear with an asterisk on the agenda are legislative in nature, and the Planning Commission will make recommendations to the Municipal Council on those items. The items that do not have an asterisk are administrative in nature, and the Planning Commission will make a decision on those items. Before we start with the items this evening, we will begin with a prayer and Pledge of Allegiance. Prayer by Mr. Howard, and the pledge by Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Please join me in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be gathered as a community. We're grateful to have this opportunity to meet together to air the community's business. We ask that we might be respectful of one another, show courtesy, and be mindful of the things we say, and we might improve our community. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise and join me in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Could I please have the commissioners participate in roll call, starting with Mr. Howard, and please state if you have any conflicts this evening.
Andrew Howard, no conflicts.
Shannon Ellsworth, no conflicts.
Dave Anderson, no conflicts.
Deborah Jensen, no conflicts.
Jamin Rowan, no conflicts.
Russell Phillips, no conflicts.
Brian Smith, no conflict.
Thank you, commissioners. All right, item 1 and item number 2 will be read in together this evening. They're related. Item 1, Brent Crane requests a conditional use permit for a high-impact service organization, 14.34.410 of the Provo City Code, to construct 72 one-bedroom units and a partner building to house various social services located at 299 East 900 South in the heavy manufacturing zone. This is in the East Bay neighborhood, and commissioners, we will be making a decision on this item. Item 2, Brent Crane requests project plan approval to construct 72 one-bedroom units and a partner building to house various social services located at 299 East 900 South in the heavy manufacturing M2 zone in the East Bay neighborhood. And Mr. Wright will present this item.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so in 2006, the Planning Commission granted a conditional use permit at this location here, 900 South, approximately 300 East. And the applicant at this time is requesting to expand that conditional use to include some residential one-bedroom units and a partnering office building to house some of the social services that they provide here. This is in the M2 zone, and here's a site plan of the area that they'd like to expand this use into on the rear portion of the property there. Going in a little closer here, we can see the proposed 6 buildings that will be used for the 72 unit residential portion. And the portion right here is where the office that will house some of the support uses there. The Design Review Committee has also reviewed this application for the project plan and given their approval for the design and for the landscaping on the site. The office space will be approximately 5,700 square feet, adding to the existing 1,800 square feet. And then to talk a little bit more about the high-impact service organizations, the code allows for these as long as certain criteria are met. Some of these criteria include that it has frontage on an arterial collector street. So 900 South here is a collector street, and it meets that requirement. Others include some proximities with some adjacent uses, such as not to be within 400 feet of schools, 200 feet of a residential zone. Also some requirements for the management of the property that they maintain and police the grounds there, the parking lot and the whole premises, to control the loitering, the noise, and the conduct of the clients there utilizing the site. And so these items have been reviewed. The section of code here is referenced in the conditions of approval that they would meet these and continually abide by the conditions listed there. Another one of them is for parking. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. The parking on the site's somewhat unique with the use for these single unit, single occupant rooms that they would, and also that the applicant has addressed the fact that most of the clients that will be utilizing this site won't have vehicles. So the parking situation is one where the Planning Commission has the opportunity to review that and approve the parking on this site. So there's proposed to be 123 parking stalls. 96 of those will meet the parking requirement for the office space, both existing and proposed. 27 parking stalls remain that can be utilized to meet parking requirement for the residential portion. There are 72 proposed units here. Staff doesn't see that there would be a need to require one parking space per unit, but the Planning Commission can talk about that and decide what they feel would be best. The code does allow for a joint parking agreement for uses that are adjacent to each other and have different uses. So for the office, that's primarily a daytime use, and then the residential would be considered primarily a nighttime use. And so the code would allow for up to 50% if the Planning Commission decided that was appropriate to use 50% of the office parking, which would be 48 spaces that could then be utilized also by the residential portion, which would give them 75 spaces for the 72 units. So that also seems like something that would be a reasonable use for parking. The conditions for both the conditional use permit and the project plan that you'll be making separate motions on are the same, and they're listed there in the staff report. If there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer those at this time.
Ms. Ellsworth?
Where is the 123 parking stalls? Is that, what I see here doesn't really seem to be 123.
Yeah, so up here in the front near the street is the existing parking. And then back here along the side here is where the proposed parking lot would be here.
I had the same question on whether this representation was with a proposed reduction or with the standard required. Without sitting here and counting every spot. Is what we're seeing here with using taking maybe for granted reduction in the amount of parking.
Yeah, so for the residential portion, our code doesn't necessarily have a specific parking ratio for a single bedroom, single occupant requirement, and that's why it has the opportunity for the Planning Commission to determine what that requirement should be.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright, is this predominantly transitional housing for people who are transitioning to self-independence?
I believe that's correct, yes.
They would be less likely to own a car.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay. All right, seeing none, I will invite the applicant, Mr. Crane, Friends of the Coalition, to present his case. Thank you.
Tonight. Thank you for being here. As you know, we were here roughly 10 years ago. I think it was actually 2006, 2007 when we received a conditional use permit. There you go. Thank you. Which was unanimously approved by the commission at that time. There's a few things that I'd like to point out that we have honored and gone above and beyond. As an organization, obviously it being a high impact use, we know with the population that we're serving that there's obviously concerns that are in the community. We approached the mayor's office, we approached the city council, planning commission, and essentially brought this location to their attention to see if this would be amenable to them. Sorry, I'm getting a little echo. Is that normal? Can you?
Is it working?
Better? Okay, sorry, I just was hearing an echo. And so, obviously, we have a great deal amount of lighting on the property. We have a high-end security system, camera footage on the property. We meet weekly with law enforcement officials from Provo City and other neighboring towns to address concerns about specific individuals that may be out in the community that may be of an adverse impact on businesses and residential communities. But as you notice from here, this location was selected because of its proximity to the railroad tracks and a buffer to the residential zone, and also because of the fact that it was low impact on the retail environment where, if you think Road Home, right? Road Home, mass congregate shelter, releasing a small city every day out into the community that has special needs with nowhere to go. This facility, they'll actually be able to stay. So currently we have 38 transitional residential units that are on the upper floor of the existing office building. And then, of course, we're proposing 6 buildings with 12 units each on the residential housing. I don't think I need to talk to you about the need for affordable housing. The real critical issue for us, think about home, okay? What does home mean to you? It's about safety, it's about security, it's about friends, it's about church, it's about neighborhood, it's about peace, it's about pets, it's all of those things wrapped up into one. And many of our clients just cannot compete. They're often competing against the student population for available housing. And so a number of our clients have, for example, Section 8 housing vouchers that they're not even worth the paper they're printed on because one-bedroom units don't exist. So that was one of the primary goals of this project, was to address the one-bedroom unit or the lack thereof in our community, and specifically give our clients a fair chance to be able to compete for available, affordable housing. That's impacting all of us. It's impacting our kids. It's not just something that somebody else has to deal with anymore, right? So I don't think I need to belabor that point, but it is something that is when it relates to what I just mentioned about what home means, if you have no ladder of upward mobility to be able to get on your feet and transition back into the community, that's not healthy for our community and for those individuals that kind of feel hopeless in that. So that's what this project does. We've got a number of additional service partners, expansion of Wasatch Mental Health being on the property, and the services they offer. We have a medical clinic on site, we have a dental clinic on site, and then we have about 12 to 15 service organizations that come regularly and do outreach. Specific to the parking question, I think that's a great question. I would probably fall in line with what the staff have proposed. I think if you looked at that Google map, I have no idea, I didn't pull that map, but if you looked at that map, you could see there was about a third utilization in the middle of the day for, just as I was looking at that map. So with the 27 units plus the allowance for half of those spaces to be dedicated for residential in the evenings, we think this is more than adequate space for the parking needs of our clients. Our architect, Scott Bingham, is here tonight to address questions about the specifics of the design of the project, but one of our motivations in this project was to create a pocket neighborhood concept, which I know Provo City has been interested in, experimenting with that in your neighborhoods. And we think that this would be a great test case to see how a pocket neighborhood impacts our clients and the community as a whole. What we're trying to present here is an opportunity. We could have put a Motel 6 type facility here. It just wouldn't have been very appealing for us, for you, for the residents that live there. And so that's why we did such an aggressive design on making it feel like home. And helping our clients transition better back into, the natural community fabric as they move on beyond this facility at some later date. So with that, I don't want to go into. I'm really here to answer your questions. I just want to put out there that we're a socially responsible organization. We deal with a challenging population. We get that. But we're part of the solution, not part of the problem. And we actually passed in this council chamber back in 1998 the panhandling ordinance for Provo City. As an organization, we sponsored that because we feel that social services, if they're nice, if they're managed well, if they're run well, that's another thing I didn't mention here is we're going to have an overnight security guard presence that we don't even have with our existing building. So it's going to provide additional oversight and management of that. And again, our continued desire to work with our neighbors. We actually impose a no loitering zone around our building. And so law enforcement will tell you if they were here tonight that they can go out and threaten a ticket for panhandling or something, no trespassing, but they found that it's much more advantageous to say, we're going to let Brent and Josh and the staff down at the Food and Care Coalition know that you're panhandling in our community. That is against the law, and they've told us that they will withhold services from you if you continue. And we usually get a much better response, a more receptive attitude from those clients that are doing that when that's presented to them. So anyways, do you have any specific questions about the usage of the property, the clientele, the project itself? I can tell you that we've got tremendous support. We just essentially started throwing this project together less than a year ago. We've already raised about 6 of the 8 million that's required for this project. The LDS Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has pledged over $1 million plus in kind. We have the Larry Miller and Gail Miller Foundation that's pledged $1 million to this project. Mark and Debbie Bingham in our community has pledged a substantial amount. Brent Wood, Leon Van Sickle, who's going to be our builder on this project, he's donating all of those services to this project and leaning on subcontractors and such to encourage them to contribute as well, just like we did with our original property. So anyways, questions?
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Hi. I've actually toured your existing facility, and I applaud it. It's well-run, and it's clean, and it's a safe haven for transient personnel, and I think you have an outstanding facility there. With the new addition, you've mentioned that there are apartments. You're helping to move out. Is there a time limit that these residents can stay there? Do you have a program to help move them on? What's
There will not be a time limit for them. This is a supportive housing program, so as long as they're compliant with any lease that you would have in any other rental situation, they're welcome to stay there. The difference that this project will provide is instead of providing supportive services in a scattered site where case managers and outreach workers have to travel between Spanish Fork and, everywhere around the valley, the support services are right there. They're encapsulated within that property setting, not just us, but the partners that I mentioned. Additional ones are places like the VA, Fresh Start. The LDS Church will have service missionaries that will be stationed there. We have a great partnership with the Utah Valley Ministerial Association, who does outreach regularly there to extend their safety and support network beyond just the social service aspect. So to answer your question, no, there is no time limit, but there is substantial support services that will be there and present that will actually encourage better behavior and help them be better prepared to transition out into the general community as a whole.
And most of your funding comes from private sources, donations?
Yes, the original project was a $6.5 million project, $6.2 million project. All but $50,000 was public funding. To date, it is all private funding that's been granted for that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioners? Yes.
I do
Mr.
have
Smith?
one more question. Is it a gated community? Is it fenced? Is it open? What does that look like?
Yeah, currently, and I don't know if Dustin can show that, if you can see just on the upper version of the parking lot there, if you actually go, well, I guess you could do that. Right to the left of the screen there, it's actually out of shot. There's actually a gate there where our facility is closed off. So Dustin, I don't know if you can highlight that little down lower, little right there. There's a gate right there. Oh, sorry, I didn't see the laser pointer. That's where our existing gate is. We've talked about putting a gate where the residential units, where that white space kind of where it's been imposed on the site plan there. Yeah, you got me. Right there. We're thinking about putting a gate there, but we don't know if it's going to be necessary if there's not a lot of people that have cars or vehicles. So, but with the security guard presence being there on site overnight, we don't know as if that's really going to be necessary, but it's something we would consider.
Otherwise fenced on all sides?
Yes, fenced on all sides, and in fact,
Yard and things like that?
yeah, the existing yard, yeah, if you want to show that where the sidewalk is, right there, there'll be a fence so that on the north side of that, towards the railroad track side, there's a laundromat that will service all of those residential buildings. And that will all be fenced off. And so the only way that the clients can come into our existing facility is if they're actually escorted by either one of our service partners or our staff. Otherwise, they'd have to go back and around the building, which they are capable and able to do.
And I ask not by way of containment, but I know in the past, in that building neighboring to the west, that in the past has been used as an indoor soccer location and things like that, where there's lots of kids running around, and if they're kind of leaving the location and running over, that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, the whole property is fenced from that back gate that I showed you, the front of the building, all the way to the back. Obviously, the parking lot for it is not fenced.
Thanks.
Commissioners, any other questions for Mr. Crane? If not, would Mr. Bingham like to walk us through the site plan?
I was hoping you'd ask me. We go to the attachment number 2, the landscape plan. So this project, like Brent said, was patterned after some studies that we had looked into for pocket neighborhoods. And obviously the scale for apartment complexes is very difficult to achieve a pocket neighborhood. So what we did was we broke down the units into 12 unit pods and then separated them considerably from each other so that it broke down the scale of the project. So now you can see daylight between them, and then we asked our landscape architect to provide as much green space and as much trees and landscaping as possible. And so what you see here, let's see, I do have a pointer. These areas right here are all grass, lawn area, and they serve a dual purpose too. We have to, we had a really neat design earlier, not to say that this one isn't neat, but we had an interesting design earlier. And then we had to figure out a way to make it accessible to the fire trucks. So here's the fire truck access right through here. And so that grass area serves double duty as a special engineered grass that allows fire trucks to go through there. Now, also what we've done is we've created community garden space right here so the tenants can come out here and grow gardens. We have some planter boxes and some barbecue and trellis features around here, and in between each unit right here, these planting areas and shaded areas right there and there and there. And all of the areas between these are all slated for planter. So those will all be planted. At this stage, we wanted to keep it a little bit more conceptual and not do all the planting plans in there, but those will all be plants. And then these are open breezeways, so at the ground level you can see through the building. It doesn't read as a giant mass. And then the tree-lined, essentially these tree-lined boulevards, if you will. So there should be a lot of room for running and playing in these areas, but also enjoying the shade of the trees and the beauty of the landscape as well. This right here is the laundry facility that Brent talked about. So it's accessible to everyone in these areas. There's a fenced area right here that separates these transitional housing applicants from these applicants over here. Fence with a gate, and then the building becomes the barrier, and then here's where the gate picks up again. I think that's about it.
Does the staff have the concept board, or have they seen the
Like the materials board. So what we're looking at in terms of materials, we're looking at two different finishes of like a hard coat stucco system. This would be a very rough finish to differentiate the corners, the building corners. And then the finer finish right here differentiates the more residential area. There's like I say, there's a gap in the building, and this is the circulation. And then a little balcony right here, so you can stand out on this balcony and appreciate some of the landscape down below. And then in this area is the little barbecue and shaded seating area that you can experience as well. Plenty of light. We tried to do very tall windows and lots of windows in here. We wanted as much light as possible. These units are small. They're in the 600 square foot range, but that doesn't mean that you can't appreciate light. Everybody, I hope, could appreciate light. We wanted a lot of light in there. We wanted the units to be nice with good materials in there, granite countertops. And what we want to do is encourage a sort of dignity in the living quarters here and in the landscaping as well. Any questions? Anything I might have missed?
Any questions, commissioners? If not, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, are there any neighborhood chairs from the East Bay neighborhood who would like to speak to this item?
We did meet with Deanna several times, and they're
No, sorry, if you would step up to the podium.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, we did meet with Deanna several times and put out the requisite notices, and there was no call for a neighborhood meeting. So, and I would point out too, I've got several of our board members that are here in support. We could have brought a huge contingency of volunteers and others, but we felt our board presence was sufficient. So you're welcome to ask questions to any of us if you have any.
Thank you. Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to this item? Are there any members of the community who would like to speak to this item? Okay, seeing no public comment, I will close this to public comment at this time. Turn it back over to the commissioners, for discussion and or a motion. And keep in mind, we are approving or disapproving or continuing items 1 and items 2. They are related.
Madam Chair, I've had time to spend down there on occasion, mainly at the invitation of some of my colleagues. And I think the operation speaks for itself. I think that like any organization that's in this kind of service, if it's well managed, it'll stay as it is and improve, and if it's not, it won't. I can tell you I have confidence in the management team. I think they do an excellent job, and I would be happy to make that motion unless there's further discussion.
Any other comments or discussion from the commissioners? Mr. Howard?
Madam Chairman, I move that we approve item 1 and item 2. That item 1, we approve the request for a conditional use permit with the following conditions: compliance with the condition outlined in 14.34.410 for high-impact service organizations, and that all remaining CRC comments are satisfied, and that the parking complies with the specifications presented. And that's it.
So just to clarify your motion in regards to number 3 of the staff recommendation concerning parking, that would be for the 50% share?
As
with office?
presented, I think, yeah. Mhm.
Thank you. Do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Ms. Ellsworth. Okay, so our motion for items 1 and item 2. Item 1.
Item 1 is the conditional use permit, and item 2 is project plan approval for the 72 one-bedroom units and a partner building.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And item 1, approval conditioned on satisfaction of the 3 staff recommendations, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, they appear to be the same, so.
And item 2 would be contingent upon approval of the conditional use permit in item 1.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. All those in favor of approval of item 1?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, item 1 is unanimously approved by the commissioners. Item 2, motion to approve. All those in agreement?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so item 2 is also approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your faith and trust.
Right, the next 2 items will also be read in together, items 3 and 4. Item 3 is legislative and will require the commissioners to forward a recommendation to municipal council. Item 4 is administrative, and the commissioners will be making a decision on item 4. Item 3, Gardner and Associates requests a zone change from public facilities, PF, to R1.6 PD to facilitate a 33-lot subdivision located at 1776 South Buckley Lane in the Provost South neighborhood. And item 4, Gardner and Associates request preliminary subdivision approval for a 33-lot subdivision in a proposed R1.6 PD zone in the Provost South neighborhood. And Mr. Yost will present this item.
Thank you. This is the site of the former Utah County Jail. I hadn't noticed the interesting irony in the address before. In 2004, the property was deeded to Provost City, and the site's now been cleared and offered for sale. The applicant, Gardner and Associates, is under contract for the purchase of the site. The proposed zone change from from PF to R16 PD aligns with the general plan and the recently adopted Southeast Neighborhood Plan. It provides for single-family homes on a relatively challenging, awkward site, and it furthers the goals and policies delineated in the general plan and meets the intent of the future land use designation in the Southeast Neighborhood Plan. Staff comments regarding our analysis of the appropriateness of this zone map amendment application is rather brief, as it does meet the established goals and policies of the general plan and the neighborhood plan. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission make a forwarded recommendation of approval to the City Council on this item. The proposed development to occupy this site, if approved, is a 33-lot single-family subdivision. This is a PD or a planned development project. Each of those sites that you see delineated with the numbered sites are building footprints or maximum building footprints, and the rest of the area is common or limited common area. The proposed development meets the standards of the R16 PD zone. The PD zone has some specific regulations in addition to the regulations of the underlying zone, which is the R16. One of the primary elements of the PD zone is that it establishes a specific density, base density, permitted base density, and then a permitted maximum density. So for the R16 area, the base density is below that proposed by the applicant, but by the a point system established in the PD zone, the applicant receives density bonus points by providing attached garages for 25 points. Public streets or streets developed to public standards, 25 points. So these 50 points multiplied by the density coefficient for the R16 underlying zone of 0.0290 gives us 1.45 density bonus points, which increases the maximum base density from 7.26 to 8.71, greater than the 8.43 units proposed by the applicant. There are a number of other regulations pertaining to setbacks, and these two instances are the only two instances where the proposed development would require variance from the standards established, which is provided for in the ordinance under 1431-0801F, states that departures from these setbacks must be justified by unique and unusual circumstances related to the site or for reasons of improved design. Staff feels that due to the topography of the site, the limited amount of developable flat ground, and due to the neighborhood's desire to, and the stated policy of the general plan to have single-family residences in this neighborhood, that the following two deviations we feel are justified. So the first is that a 20-foot setback is required where the development abuts adjacent parcels. So this would be both, the development is provided, the applicant's provided 10 feet on this north side to the left, which abuts a separate piece of property to the north. Again, due to the width of the site and the required roads meeting public standards, we feel that that deviation from that 20-foot setback to the adjacent property is justifiable. And then second, the code requires building spacing of 15 feet between buildings for a single story and 20 feet for two-story. The proposed buildings are 2 stories with a proposed spacing of 10 feet. Due to the character of the project as a PUD and the common area surrounding these properties and the location of the parking and vehicular access at the front of the properties, removing any need to be able to move through them, staff also feels that due to those reasons and for the reasons of being able to appropriately fit the number of units required to make the project viable and really have a development that meets the intent of the general plan, that that deviation from the building-to-building spacing is also, we feel, justifiable. So those are the 2 deviations from the standard.
Mr. Pepperoni, did you have a comment?
Oh, go ahead.
So as Josh was saying, this is a very isolated tabletop, difficult piece to develop. The elementary school that sits here is
Where'd my slide go?
many feet above the site, and this site itself is many feet above Slate Canyon Drive. The developers set these units in such a way that they would be able to eat some of that change in elevation and have daylighted basements, which is a good thing. About 2 years ago, we had a proposal for a townhouse project on this same site. The city has done this for many years and has been trying to sell it for many years. I was at the neighborhood meeting where the townhouse proposal was proposed, and even though, again, it's a very isolated site with access that doesn't really go through a neighborhood, there was huge opposition to that development, and the overwhelming sentiment of the neighborhood was for single-family detached product. So that's what the developer has chosen to bring forward. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff? Mr. Anderson?
The street cross-section,
Yes.
sidewalk on one side, what's the decision-making process like in terms of deciding what the cross-section for a street looks like in a project like
Let's
this?
have our Public Works representative speak to this.
Okay. Does that make sense, Dave? Just
Mr. Day?
Yeah, David Day with Public Works. Our ordinance allows for, in the hillside areas, a sidewalk on one side. The width of the street would be based on traffic volumes. I think what we've worked out, it seems a 24-foot road on the loop and probably a 32-foot road on the through road would be most likely what we would see on those roads. But the sidewalk on one side is allowed in the hillside areas.
Are those curb-to-curb dimensions? Face of curb to face of curb?
When I say 24 and 32, that's an asphalt width. Yeah. So it'd be like around a 50-foot right-of-way, plus or minus.
Any questions for Mr. Day?
so only having sidewalk on one side, that's a factor of topography? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's somewhat kind of a judgment call. Is this a hillside or not? I mean, there is a lot of elevation change, and so one of the concessions to be able to build in those areas is the sidewalk can just be put on one side if necessary.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Day? Thank you. Right, I would like to invite the applicant, Gardner and Associates, to present items 3 and 4.
My name's Dave Gardner. When we had our neighborhood meeting, we made the commitment to the neighbors that we would do single-family detached. We could create a lot different feel if we did townhomes or twin homes, but that was not what we wanted to try to shoot for. So we also made the commitment that this was going to be a 55 and older community. And we feel like there's a strong market for that. And this is a good location. This property has great views. So we feel like what we're proposing is something that would be an asset to the neighborhood. And it so happens to be a very marketable product. Do you have anything specific that I need to address?
Ms. Ellsworth, did you have a question?
Yeah, how does the city regulate 55 plus communities?
We do not regulate them. That's a deed restriction.
Oh, okay.
But this project will most likely proceed through the zone change approval with a development agreement to ensure that after the zoning is put in place, that what is being proffered by the applicant will indeed be constructed, and that guarantee will be under that development agreement. But the development agreement does not actually regulate, create that 55 and older restriction. That's a deed restriction.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's my neighborhood, and I didn't get to go to the neighborhood meeting, but was there an initial idea of having just a fraction of that as 55 plus, and then a fraction is not?
If you're going to mix 55 and not 55, there's CC&R provisions that have gone through the courts that the attorneys will say you can have up to 20% not 55, but the rest has to be 55 in order to stay within existing case law. The other option is to go 100% 55. We made the commitment because of our market research to do 100% 55 and older.
Do we have any other 55 plus communities in our city?
Freedom Boulevard.
Yes, we did Trellis on the Green and made the commitment that be 55 and older. We did have the 20% rule in that, which allowed a few cells that were not 55, but over the 10 years that's been in existence, it has evolved into 100% 55 and older.
Gotcha.
The building on 500 West across from the supermarket was also proposed
Right.
55 and over.
The Cascade Gardens at 200 North, 500 West, and the Valley Villa at 200 North and 7th West is another age-restricted project, and so is the Mazer School. Those are all three obviously rental, and some of them are income restricted as well. But yeah, that Trellis on the Green is another for sale age-restricted product.
Gotcha.
Mr. Smith? Oh, sorry.
Was there interest from the neighborhood about not doing a 55 plus community, of having multiple?
Yeah, there was some discussion with some of the people there that felt like it would be nice to have younger families, in that you have the school right next door, and that would be a plus. And I don't disagree that would be a positive way to go as well. We're more comfortable with the target market of the 55 and older. We think that's a market that hasn't been met, very, very well at all in Provo. So that's what we would like to do. And the neighbors, in having that meeting, they voiced those concerns. I don't know what the percentages were, but what we would like to do is the 55 and older, and I think that's the majority of what the neighbors that showed up at the meeting felt was best.
Okay.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, my question is about the underground detention system. Is that kind of a flat grass layer or level with a grate or a water, intake system, or in the middle of the homes there?
Oh,
What's
this,
it look like? Yeah, in the square,
this here?
right? Or is it a dugout detention pond?
No,
or-
it's just something the engineer put in there to show that that's going to be, we're going to have some kind of amenity there.
Grassy
An open
area.
space, yeah. The actual detention area will be over here, right there where it kind of flattens out. That's not flat by any means, but that's going to be the detention area from all of this.
Okay.
And there's still, we still have 3 or 4 pages of engineering details we've got to go through on this.
I just read underground detention system, and it made me think, is that going to be a bowl? Is it going to be a flat with a grate, or whatever it is?
If that's what we end up as far as doing that, it'll be grassed over and level. It won't be a pit.
Okay.
Commissioners, any other questions?
One. I just wondered for sure if you would tell us the variances, the setback we're gonna decrease, and also the side yard width.
Yeah, again, if we attach these units to make twin homes out of them, we would easily have the separation, the 15-foot separation that the ordinance requires. But that's a twin home, and that's a little different than what we feel like our strongest market is, and that's to be completely detached. So the unit is on its own. We're comfortable that with the design of the floor plan and the placement of windows on those walls that are close to each other. We've done this before in other projects, and you don't see into the windows of the other person. So we would like to have the 10-foot setback and not be forced to connect those, because that would be what we would end up having to do. And then I wouldn't have as much neighborhood support.
So in
And
other
then the
words,
20-foot side yard this is the House of Hope area right here, and we're only 10 foot off from that property line. I can probably get the 20 feet in there by cutting off the back of the lots. I'd prefer not to, but if that's a concern with the Planning Commission, that's something that we can do. The separation between buildings only being 10 feet, that's important to keep the units single-family detached.
Any other questions? Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah. Again, I didn't get to go to the neighborhood meeting, but a friend of mine had some interest in purchasing one of these properties.
Mm-hmm.
And he said at the neighborhood meeting that when he expressed that interest, the developer's representative was not interested in selling to him because he wasn't married.
No, he wasn't 55.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if he was married or not, but I could tell just by looking at him, he wasn't even close to my age.
Okay. Yeah, I guess there was a unique story going around when the development was in kind of the fractional phase of 55 plus and not. So.
Now, if he's not a Mormon, I would discriminate against him, but no. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Mr. Gardner? Okay, thank you, sir. Right, is the Provo South Neighborhood Chair present, and would you like to speak to this item?
Hi, my name is Vicki Connect. I'm the Provo South Chair, and we did have a neighborhood meeting concerning this about 5 months ago, and I can say that the majority of the people there were approving of this. We did have some young single professionals that were upset that they would not be able to get into the 55 and older community, but the majority were there. In fact, we had at least 3, maybe 4 people that would have bought it on the spot had it been available right then. They were very interested in this community. And I know that we had always talked about having single-family housing there. And at first, we did meet with some, I had a couple of people call and talk to me about it being senior housing because they wanted to see families there. And this was PTA presidents calling me, and they wanted to see kids there and things like that. And I pointed out to her that oftentimes seniors become a part of the elementary school there and helping out and reading and different things. And we did take a little tour of different developments that are 55 and older, and she turned around completely as far as that was concerned and was very excited to have this and spoke in favor of it. So yeah, we're very welcoming to this type of a community and building and would like to see it. Any questions?
Any questions? Mr. Smith?
I do have one question. Are you pushing for street names?
No, actually, I prefer numbers. That's my preference, but I don't know. I guess that's up to the city as to what they want to name them.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to these items? Are there any members of the community who would like to speak to items 3 and 4? Okay, if not, I will close the session to public input and return it back over to the commissioners for further discussion and/or motion.
Seems like a good use of the property to me. I'm not really enamored with the idea of just having a sidewalk on one side of a street. I'm comfortable with how things lay out, but don't really love the idea of giving applicants bonus points or consideration for garages and having public streets, which to me should be a given. And 2-story homes, that's the, no. Okay, I misunderstood that then.
They're 1 story with a full basement.
Okay.
Could I
Got it.
also address your sidewalk on one side?
Please step up to the podium if you'd like to comment.
The only place that we'd have sidewalk on one side of the street is right here on this street as it comes in. There would not be sidewalk on that side. There would be sidewalk on the other side, and there's sidewalk on both sides of this loop road.
That makes sense.
Perfect. I think that's great.
Thank you.
So those are my thoughts.
Any other comments from the commissioners or a motion?
I have a kind of a discussion point. I'm concerned about the economic impacts of a 55-plus community, what that would create long-term. Is there any information on that or any desire to see more diverse neighborhoods? I'm in favor of diverse neighborhoods. I'm in favor of diverse economic
Point well taken.
opportunities.
Certainly, we talk about that often, right? It seems like in a lot of contexts. And there are times where I'm probably more in favor of homogeneous neighborhoods, but this location right next to an elementary school, some different things like that. I'm not hung up either way necessarily, but I probably would prefer to see just a regular market rate kind of a development and see it left that way, but.
I think it would be a vast improvement to what's there. I think that it's a blight if you've driven past that for as many years as I have. That old prison needs to go, and quickly. So I'm in favor of this project, and unless you have other discussions, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Please. Yep.
I'll just say really quickly, I mean, I wish I knew more, Shannon, about the kind of the history and the legality of a 55-plus community. I just don't. I don't know as much as I'd want to. I mean, I think I'm with you. On the face of it, it seems a bizarre thing that's a possibility that's been, that is perfectly legal. But I don't know that yeah, I don't know how much say we have if it's an option, if it's available to the developer, and the developer wants to pursue that. And speak for market reasons. I just don't know what choice we have as a city. Maybe we do have more choice than we recognize. I mean, but I would assume that the developer gets to choose what they want to do with the property. I don't.
Yeah, we have no purview, no ability to regulate occupancy restrictions like this, or the form of ownership, those type of things.
Do you know? I mean, I can certainly do more homework on my own, but is there a way? Do you have like a brief history of like the existence of the 55 and older subdivision kind of possibility, or? I mean, because in other words, a developer couldn't go in and put in racial restrictions, though that certainly used to happen. Why is it that? What's that?
You probably live in a subdivision with racial.
That may have been, yeah.
Covenants.
So what is it? What's the history of the 55 plus?
Let's
let our
Mr. McGann
Gary
will
take
answer
care of
that
this.
for us.
Funny you would ask that. Age is not a protected class under the U.S. Constitution or the state of Utah's Constitution. And under federal law, under the Fair Housing Act, there are some restrictions dealing with prohibitions against discrimination based upon race and age, things like that. However, under federal law, there is a specific exemption for age, specifically 55 and older housing, and it's specifically allowed. And it is a form of ownership similar to whether a corporation could come in and buy one of these units, or a partnership, or an individual, or a limited partnership, or any actual legal form, legal entity that could purchase a home can go in there and purchase it, and Provo City has no say in that. Provo City regulates land, not ownership. And so under federal law, there being no prohibition in particular in the state constitution or under the federal constitution, federal law has come in, and under the Fair Housing Acts and various amendments to it have made 55 and older housing specifically allowable. And that is a form of ownership that the owner of the land or developer of the land could put it in as 55 and older or not. And Provo City does not regulate that one way or another. And so as far as the actual approval of a project plan, this is one of those things that's outside the purview of the Planning Commission to deal with.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Ellsworth?
Oh, I just want to comment that there's that elementary school next door. Then there's the elementary school that's a quarter mile away down on State Street, a charter school. And I do wonder about my experiences in Arizona, where there are miles and miles of 55 plus communities, and how monochromatic it is, and how they are vacant half of the year. And I think that we'll probably see some of that. I don't make decisions based on ecclesiastical congregations, but people in Provo set store by that, and it would make for a very monochromatic ecclesiastical congregation. Not that you should consider that.
Just saying.
Well, it's good to hear it. Good to hear it.
Any other discussion by the commissioners? A motion?
Can we make
Two separate?
Yeah, two separate. I think I'd just clarify the voting
Separate?
process.
I'm with you there. All right, Madam Chairman, I move that we recommend to the council a zone change from public facilities PF to R16PD to facilitate a 33-lot subdivision located at 1776 South Buckley Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. So item 3, the motion is made to send a positive recommendation to municipal council to request a zone change from PF to R16PD for a 33-lot subdivision in the Provo South neighborhood. Do we have a second for this item?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Smith. All those in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation to Municipal Council for item 3?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, so the motion carries. We will send a positive recommendation for item 3 to Municipal Council. Item number 4 is for approval or disapproval of a preliminary subdivision plot, and I'm looking for a motion on that.
Before Mr. Howard makes that motion, I did have one more question for the developer about the phasing. I meant to ask that, and I just didn't until just now.
Mr. Gardner?
Done. Now's the time.
Yeah, why the phasing instead of just including
Oh,
all in
yes,
one?
that's, we've had this property under option for over a year. And part of the development is this area here, or at least part of the property that we were supposed to be buying, that's owned by the state of Utah. And that's all part of their detention center, juvenile detention center. This piece that we're talking about tonight is all owned by Provo City. The state property has a portion of it that has a reversion clause in it that if any time in the future the state were to sell this or a piece of this property, it reverts back to the county.
Oh, the county.
Utah County gave that property to the state, didn't take payment, but had a reversion clause in it. Now, that reversion clause covers this area right in here. So it doesn't cover all of the property, it just covers enough to screw up our doing it all at once. So if we are concerned that the market might change, we want to get in and get going. We feel like if we can get these 33 going, that gives the city time to work through with the county and the state. I can't imagine a worse nightmare for a developer to have the city, the county, and the state trying to work together. But I honestly feel like the city's going to be able to pull this off. And once that, it'll probably be after the first of the year. Once that happens, then we'll be back in to ask for this property to be rezoned and the other portion of the property, get the site plan approval on that.
Thanks for the history. Appreciate it. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
Oh, you can go ahead.
You're doing
All
the
right,
heavy lifting.
all right.
Mr. Howard?
Madam Chairman, I recommend, or I move that we approve item 4, a preliminary subdivision for a 33-lot subdivision in a proposed R1 6PD zone, following item 3.
All right, let me restate your motion.
Please do.
Item 4, Mr. Howard's motion is to approve Gardner and Associates' request for a preliminary subdivision approval for a 33-lot subdivision in a proposed R1.6 PD zone in the Provo South neighborhood, and that would be contingent upon the rezoning request being approved by Municipal Council in item 3, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Do we have a second for the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Rowan. All those in favor of approval of item 4 with those conditions?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, item 4 is approved unanimously. And our last item this evening, item 5, is clarification of a planning commission motion made in the September, I believe it was the 22nd, 2016 meeting regarding a request by Economic Development for amendments to the SC3 zone. Mr. McGinn?
Yes, this is back on. In that meeting, after hearing the item, there was a motion to continue. As the motion was discussed and talked about, there was some confusion among staff as to the exact nature of the motion that was made and exactly what on what the Planning Commission was voting. Was it a motion to continue the item to come back to Planning Commission at some future point, or was it a recommendation to the council to continue this item until certain information or issues had been resolved. And so this is just being brought back to the Planning Commission for discussion and to vote again to clarify what the motion actually was. If it was a motion to return to Planning Commission, then what would be the triggering event? Is that a date specific or an action specific time, or if it were, or whether it was a motion to recommend to the council that they continue this item to deal with certain issues that were discussed in the meeting last time.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. McGinn?
I can jump in. I'm the one that made the motion, the original motion, and my intent was to just continue the item, not to forward a recommendation of continuance to the municipal council. And I suppose I should have said more than I did when making the motion about at what point, or to a certain date, or what information I would hope to see. And so maybe I can offer that, and I'm happy to do so now or at a later point after other discussions.
So state an alternative motion? Or
I
restate the
think
motion?
at this point, probably the easiest and best way is, since you made the motion last time, go ahead and make whatever motion it is that you would like to make now. And then sorry, I can't remember who seconded it, but then if there's a second, then we can have discussion and a vote by Planning Commission and go from there.
Okay. I am going to say just a couple of words before I remake the motion, and of course we can continue that discussion afterwards if we want to. In the process of discussing this proposal at our last Planning Commission meeting, what I was really disappointed with is certainly the economic development came back to us and said, okay, we're willing to set a limit to the density. But that totally overlooked what I thought was a much larger concern about the percentage, 20 versus 33%. Economic development, this was my memory of the meeting, my impression of the meeting, continued to kind of use as a rationale for the 33%, just driving around, just kind of eyeballing it. That seems to be just fine. It's not 50%, but it's, that would be bad. But, 33% seems okay. I was very unimpressed and not persuaded by that rationale. I would like to see from economic development some economic development research. Since that meeting, I know that there's been a bit of, I don't know how much research, but some that they've done in which they discovered that at the University Mall, the number is 20% residential to other stuff. So I don't know if that's continued or not, but I would like to see a lot, a substantial amount of research. Again, I was not very pleased with the suggestion from economic development that kind of research would be impossible to do. If that's the case, then I feel like the Planning Commission, I'd be happy for us to be tasked to do that research and be given a significant more amount of time. I mean, I think if economic development, this is their job, they should be able to do the research, the economic development research, to offer us a persuasive rationale for why 33% versus 20%. I'd also like them to consider, I know Mrs. Jensen suggested the possibility of exploring a ITOD zone. So I want significant research to go behind this. I don't want to have economic development say to us, we're just eyeballing it, and this is as good as anything. Seems like it makes sense. Why wouldn't it make sense? This is what the developer wants. Why wouldn't we give the developer what they want? That's not satisfying to me. So that's why I made the motion that I did, because it just seemed like they weren't willing to put in the work to give us that information. And I want that work from them. And if they're not willing to do it, then I would like to then I would like to figure out how we take that on, if it's us or some other body. So Having said that, hopefully that's clear enough of what I'd like to, why I made the motion to continue. I'd like to remake the motion that we continue Provo City Economic Development's request for a code amendment to section 14.20.160 to increase the amount of residential development in a regional shopping center zone from 20 to 33%. This has citywide application. And I'd like to continue it until, I recommend that we continue it until economic development offers satisfying research that shows why 33% is a reasonable number, that includes economic development research of nearby, or like cities like Provo and what they're doing.
Commissioners, any further discussion? Ms. Ellsworth?
I was going to second the motion.
We can second and then still discuss.
I'll
Right.
second that motion.
Let me see if I can restate it. Item 5, this is for clarification of a planning commission motion made in the September 22nd meeting regarding a request by economic development for amendments to the SC3 zone. My understanding of the motion presented by Mr. Rowan is to continue item 5 until economic development does appropriate research to provide information why 33% residential development is recommended as an increase over the existing 20% residential, and what the recommendations are based upon. Does that satisfy? Okay. Do we have a second for that motion? Ms. Ellsworth?
I'll second that motion.
Great. All those in favor of forwarding a recommendation for a continuance of item 5?
All those in favor of continuing.
Continuing,
Yeah.
okay.
Stay right here.
Just to continue.
All of those in favor of continuing item 5 as stated in the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So we have one abstention. Mr. Howard, because he was.
I wasn't here either, so.
You can sit.
I don't know what's appropriate.
Mr. Howard and Mr. Anderson both were not present.
And that's appropriate, since what this is a revisiting of the item and the motion that was made in the previous meeting, and if they weren't there, if you're not at the meeting, you don't vote. And so it's appropriate to abstain from voting.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
Again, for the notes, I hope it's clear. I want the recommendation of 33% to be backed up with research, like case studies. I want to see that stuff, not just.
Feels good.
Yeah, feels good. Feels about right.
I think we need to make sure that we understand that they could come back with quantifiable research that says maybe it's 50%, or quantify the 20% that it currently is. Has that been done? There's a lot of difference that we could find ourselves in, and it might be a lot different than 33%. But we'll know based on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'd rather have that than just eyeballing it.
Then we know.
Giving your best guess,
but now
or doing what some developer tells you to do.
Yes. And
Mr.
just
Anderson.
for whatever this is worth, I'm going to struggle recommending that we change anything until we see why it makes a particular project work that we think is good for a site and the city. So I'm going to struggle with the idea that there's a change that needs to be made in advance of seeing why, seeing the real life Provo example. I don't know if we're thinking about the mix or properties in East Bay or wherever, but if it takes 33% to make a great project work, great. Maybe if it takes more than that to make a great project work, great. But if the project is a dog and it's 20% residential, then I'm going to struggle with it even at that, so.
I mean, if I were economic development, I would almost go back to the proposed developer and say, where did you come up with 33%? And you do the work and you find out, let's do it in tandem. And, help us understand where you came up with this number, because they're the ones where it originated, I believe.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but I'd rather have Provo City figure out what's best for Provo City. The developers,
I mean, if what they present, it makes sense and is right, then it makes sense and it's right.
Yeah, I would just be more suspicious of developers kind of fudging whatever, or just coming up with whatever they need to come up with. I mean, the reason they're doing it is because it's economically more feasible for them. They're going to be able to make more money. I want to know, why do you feel like, a shopping center zone on the BRT line with a stop at the place, should be 33% residential and again, I guess medium density is kind of the low, is the minimum. I'm going to want to say, why would you feel like medium density is the threshold for that?
I'm going to beat a dead horse here and just say again, I think the property's zoned inappropriately, and changing all the SC3 in the city to accommodate a given project is not the right approach. And I really think the zoning should be appropriate to the location. The location is now a TOD. There's a UTA stop there, which may someday be light rail. Right now it's BRT.
We should probably look at the TOD zone in one of our study sessions, because it would actually allow for a lot more residential and a lot less commercial than what the SC3 allows. And there's actually prohibition in the ITOD zone that keeps a commercial use from being over 2,500 square feet. So we should look at that zone, I think.
That would be great, yeah.
Madam Chair? Oh, go ahead.
I just have a question about a different matter, if that's okay. Can a developer owner discriminate on the basis of religion?
Thank you. I was going to
No.
ask that question.
Okay.
That's protected by the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution.
Pretty sure he was joking, though.
That was a poor tasting joke.
Poor joke.
Yeah.
A really poor joke.
I was offended by it, quite honestly.
And I was
And
offended as
I
well.
was about to say something, but
No, I was offended.
I would hope he knows better.
Now I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Rowan.
Emotional meeting. Keyword motion.